So, as some of you probably know, I have ADHD. This means that some of my best research and some of my biggest discoveries occur at like 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning when I should be asleep, but I've woken up, thought of something, grabbed my phone and started looking. And this is one of those things. I actually was having one of those nights the other night, so I started looking things up on my phone, as you do. And it led to a really important question. Now, I think that before I actually get to that question, I need to go through some images with you first to show you exactly what I'm talking about. So I'm going to start with that. So thanks to the media, we have loads of photos of that property on Gerlock Road. We can basically examine it from every single angle, and a lot of people did. And I think most of us have spent a lot of time examining the photos, and of course we watched the video with Janie doing the guided tour of the property. So we have in fact become pretty familiar with this property. Now, most people would have been looking at the things around the property, looking at Janie's RV, looking at those piles of tin and the scraper for the gravel and the fencing and stuff like that. But the first thing that stood out to me was how well done that driveway was. And we've heard Janie's lived there for 26 years, so it figures that, you know, when you have property and you put a house on that property, the first thing you do before you put that house on is that you have to level the land. So it makes sense that, you know, this was all done when they bought the property or inherited the property or whatever, and this is how it's always been. So even though I figured, well, it was just a part of the property, this is how the property was set up, I still felt a little bit of envy, and let me explain why. I used to own a property. It was a fairly large property, and the road through that property up to my house was 1 kilometre long and steep. You had some sections that were sandy, clay kind of ground. You had some sections that were heavy clay, and then some sections that were actually quite deep clay. And when I bought the property, the only areas that had been effectively graded were up at the top of the property when it started to level out, and that was all beautifully graded and gravelled, and down around the front gate. But of course, because it did have that sandy base, it would get washed out quite often. And because the road through the property was quite steep, that could get washed out quite often. Meaning that there were times when, in between getting someone in with an excavator, while I was saving up to do so, I would find myself having to be very careful about how I navigated my property. As you can see, it wasn't always successful, and I did have several occasions when I had to call in a tow truck. So why am I telling you this? It's fecking expensive to get an excavator in to level land, to dig out an area of land and to level it off and to compact it down and bring in gravel if that is needed. Anytime I had to get just this one section of my driveway fixed was upwards of $300-400, and this is just one teeny part of the driveway where basically the bank would get dug out on the side, it would get levelled off, more gravel would be put in, which would eventually end up washing out if we had a bad flood, But, what I'm talking about here is a few hours work with an excavator. Not a huge amount of work. Not a massive job like digging out an entire bank. But it was expensive. Because the thing is, you are paying diesel for the truck that carts the equipment. You are paying diesel for the equipment, and that's not cheap. And then you are paying by the hour for the work that's being done. And because it is hard work and it's work that is in high demand, then you do pay a decent amount by the hour. I think, and this is going back about 10 years. I think then it was costing me about probably $120 an hour just for the actual work side of it. And that's before adding in any gravel or anything like that. And that was mates' rates with someone local that I knew. If I were to get someone that I didn't know, just a random business in to do it, it probably would have cost me well over $1,000 to do this little bit of work, just patching up a driveway. So when I saw these images of the property on Gairloch Road, I could well and truly appreciate the time and cost involved in basically setting up this driveway the way it is, particularly in cutting out that bank so that it was level for that RV, because as you can see, there's a heck of a lot of work in that, because the bank behind the RV is pretty much as high as the RV. This is several days' work if you were to do this, setting up a property from scratch. So what's my point, you're wondering? Well, let's go back to me talking about the other night when I was scrolling through things on my iPad, or on my phone, at 2 a.m. in the morning. Now, normally when a case first breaks, one of the first things I do is go on Google Maps or Google Earth and take a look at the property, and I always have a look at the street view of the property. I think because we had all the drone footage and all the footage from media, that I simply didn't do so, because I didn't need to do so. There was so much really good quality images. But of course, at 2 o'clock in the morning, it's amazing the things that you need to do suddenly. And I just decided to do a search for this property. Even though I've mapped it several times, I've never actually looked at the images of this property that were available on Google Maps. So I did, and I've just zoomed in a bit on what came up. Now, I will note that when I checked it with my iPad, I got it from a different date again. So I think the first image that I showed you was from 2017. I think this image here is from 2019. And of course, the first thing that stands out here is there's no RV. The second thing that stands out, of course, is there's no driveway alongside the house. Now, luckily, there's a woodshed up the back there that we can use to get our bearings. And we know that in front of that woodshed was the cubby, and then you had the fence, which I think has probably not moved that much from where it is when you have a look at the other photos again. Okay, so I'm going to say that actually the fence has been moved in slightly. I think where that little hand is pointing, that fence post there may have been part of the original fence line, and then they moved it inwards to make the yard bigger off the side of Janie's RV. But when you look, you can see that where Janie's RV is now, there was actually a bank. Quite a significant bank, and we know it's quite a significant bank anyway, because we've seen the images where it's been dug out. So, like I said, this image is about 6 years old. So at some point in time over the past 6 years, someone has gone onto that property and done some major work on that driveway. That is a couple of days' work at the very least. That's a lot of diesel. It's a costly job to do, a very costly job to do. As I mentioned, going back 10 years when I had to get people in to do my driveway, that was only a few hours work, and that was $300-400, $400-500, depending on how much work needed to be done. This is a lot of digging out. This is basically an entire bank that had to be removed and dug out up to the level of the roof of that RV. So my question is this. When you look at the state of that property, you would expect that actually Janie really doesn't seem to have a great deal of money. And given the fact that she apparently doesn't work and she was living there on her own when Daniel and Malaya moved in with the children, and had been for quite some time by the sounds of it. It sounds like her and Earl had been separated for a very long time. So that means that either she has some sort of other income that she hasn't told us about, maybe an illegal income that we shouldn't know about, or she has connections through family or through community with someone who owns an excavator and can do the job for her free or cheap. You get where I'm going with this now, don't you? If they have ready access to someone who owns an excavator, someone who is close enough to be able to come and help them out with any jobs they need, would they be able to get this person to just come in at the drop of a hat to dig a hole for them, for example, with their excavator somewhere random? I really hope that the RCMP have looked closely at the topography of the other properties in the area connected to Janie McKenzie. She's told us she's got 7 acres of land somewhere up near Earl and near her brother's place. We know that Earl's got land, her brother's got land. So my question is, did RCMP actually have a good look at the land around there? Or did they just basically check in the woods for these children? I'd be very interested to know if anyone has gone over those properties with a drone. And of course the big question is there someone in Janie's family or Earl's family who owns an excavator and can do jobs for this family just like that?